It's the wrong title.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Can you tell what is the Hi everybody, welcome. This is not maintaining green infrastructure. Marianne, what is our title?
Promoting sustainability by water neutral development.
Thank you. That is what is, I'm just looking now. That is what is listed everywhere else, except for my slides. So welcome everyone. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the executive director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I'm your webcast moderator. For content questions related to the presentation, just type those in the Q&A box. We'll get to those at the end during our Q&A. For any technical questions, again, type those in the Q&A box and I'll do my best to answer those for you. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2023. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we are sponsored by the APA ENRI division, which is the Environment, Natural Resources, and Energy division, in collaboration with the Water and Planning Network of APA. So welcome and thank you for joining us again. We have had you before this year, and we encourage everyone to view all of our recording sessions, and our last recorded session with ENRI and the Water Network is also up on our YouTube channel. Today's session is worth 1.5 CM credits and 1 sustainability and resilience credit. Logging your credits, head over to planning.org, log into your MyAPA account. From there, you can search by today's title or event number, both of which you can find on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And if you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes, when new sessions are available for you to register for, things like that. And as I mentioned previously, we record all of our sessions and we post them onto our YouTube channel. So head over there, subscribe to our channel, and you'll see that we have well over 400 recordings available to you for free. So subscribe to our channel so that you get notified when a new session is up on our channel. Again, if you have any questions related to the presentation for our speakers, type them in. We'll get to those at the end of the Q&A. And it does help me if you can list who it is that you would like to answer the question. That just helps when I'm organizing everything during our Q&A. So that's the end of my housekeeping items. With that, Bill, I'm going to turn things over to you, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Marianne, you can pull things up.
Okay.
All right, Bill.
Great. Well, thank you, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining the Promoting Water Sustainability by Enabling Water Neutral Development webinar. I am Bill Sesnick. I'm the co-chair of the Water and Planning Network at APA. And before I get going, I wanted to give a special thanks to the ENRI division and to Ohio APA for helping us and supporting us as we move forward as the Water and Planning Network, basically an interest group at APA. Basically, I want to talk about the Water and Planning Network for just a minute before we get into the presentation. We're looking for members, new members always, folks that are interested at working at the intersection of water and land use. You don't need to be an APA member to join, and there's no cost. We're promoting interdisciplinary engagement. And basically, we're trying to expand the knowledge base for water and planning. And we have newsletters and webinars such as these, and these will continue a couple times a year. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Marianne Dickinson, a water efficiency expert and our first speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. It's my job today to sort of set the stage for what we mean by water neutral development and how it's kind of transpired so far. So what I wanted to do is just start, and explain the problem that got us all motivated to think about this topic. As you all know, many cities in North America have been, over the past number of years, been challenged to meet some of their customer demands of water because of scarcities and drought. But there's still growing population and economic growth, and that's happening particularly in a lot of the western states that are particularly water challenged. And so it provides, a lot of pressure in some of these arid and water short areas. But as the droughts are occurring, and as we're asking our customers in our water supply systems to conserve, where they're raising the issue of, well, what about the new development? Why should I conserve if all the water I'm saving is just going to, supply a subdivision down the street? It's not fair. So those kinds of issues have cropped up in a number of water districts across the country who have been having trouble accommodating growth and have been dealing with a lot of these issues, especially as drought intensifies. So we gave this a bit of thought because we were seeing lots of, ugly press about moratoriums being issued, home building halted. I was on a water district board in my local community, and we had to actually issue a complete moratorium, not even one single family house during our really extreme drought period. So it was not a very comfortable position to be in. And it's going to get worse for a lot of these Western states. This is a terrific graphic that's put together by the Environmental Protection Agency, and it shows what domestic water use is, where the more blue the state, the more water they use. But the percentages in the states are their growth from the year 2000 to 2020. And so you can see the states that use a lot of water and are growing the fastest are the states that really are suffering from a lot of scarcity. So we are tending not to grow in the right places. Michigan, which is a state with lots of water, only grew by 1%. But look at, Nevada, 55%, Texas, 40%. So these are high numbers, and it's really leading us to analyze how we can continue to accommodate growth in these areas. So as we've seen, the Sun Belt of the U.S. has been experiencing some extreme heat, especially this year. Phoenix had 19 straight days of 43 degrees Celsius, which is high, low hundreds. But the census figures show that 12 of the 15 fastest growing cities in America are in this Sun Belt region. So we have to, provide some tools to help them with that. 5 counties are experiencing the most growth in Arizona, Florida, and Texas. Again, 3 states that have some fairly serious water issues. And so rather than trying to get people to migrate away from these climate vulnerable zones, Americans are moving towards them, and we have to figure out a way to accommodate that kind of growth. But sidelined with all this is another problem that our water and planning network tries to address, which is that the water utility planning folks and the local community comprehensive planning folks have historically not been well connected. We tend to be in our separate silos. And this has been going on for decades. There's not often much interchange and exchange of information between the staffs of these two entities. And that's a problem, because the communities who are planning for rapid growth need to understand where their water is coming from. The water suppliers and wastewater utilities who are planning to accommodate that growth also need to communicate what that might cost in the community. And historically, the water utility managers have been nervous about it. They really feel they should just be told by their community what the growth will be and how to provide for it, and it's their job to provide for it. They don't want to be what they always fondly called themselves, social engineers. They want to just provide the water as they need to. But that's not always very easy. It's especially in a lot of these very arid states, and Colorado River Basin in particular has been going through huge amounts of reductions and need for drastic demand management in a lot of those states. So we want to create this disconnect, because this disconnect between the water staff at the water utilities and wastewater utilities and the comprehensive planning staff at the local level, they need to work a lot more closely together and focus more particularly on the very real connection between water and land use. So we did a little study when I was at the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the former CEO of a national organization called the Alliance for Water Efficiency. And we have been doing a lot of work in this area of water and land use. And we got a small grant from the Babbitt Center of the Lincoln Policy Institute to take a look at what kind of coordination was occurring between water utilities and land use entities and how the states were perhaps requiring it. And what we found that there were really only 9 states were requiring water utilities to incorporate land use planning in the water plans. And the methods they required varied considerably, and you can see the list of the states: California, Colorado, Connecticut, Kentucky, Maryland, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Utah, Washington. Those are the only 9 states that actually mention this in their water plans. 10 states require community land use plans to incorporate the water utility plan. So it's the other direction. And so you see the list of those 10 states, but only 3 states provided by statute any kind of technical assistance or funding to help support the coordination between the water utilities and land use planners. And those 3 states were California, Colorado, and Maryland. 5 of the 10 states did expressly mention water supply in their statutes or regulations that would be required to be added to their land use plans. Each of those 10 states do require water elements to be included in the land use plans, but only 6 states require that water utilities directly coordinate with land use planners in their community. So these are big gaps that need to be fixed, and we're really hoping in our water planning network that we can address that. But we wanted to let you know that the report is very detailed. It's available on the Lincoln Institute website. So when you get the slide deck, you can click on the links and take a look, and also receive information from them on a lot of these issues about better coordination. But to get to the issue of water neutrality, we took a look at the issue of water offsets at the Alliance for Water Efficiency because we thought that would be an answer to the scarcity problem, which is simultaneous with the growth issue. Because if you offset the new development growth, you can allow that growth without having to greatly increase your system-wide water supply, your consumption levels within the water supplier community. And so what we were thinking that an offset would be a combination of on-site water efficiency, which would bring the demand way down, and off-site water efficiency, which is where the offset would be, applied as a credit to the new development because they would be doing, water efficiency retrofits on other properties. So doing that kind of thing can reduce or even sometimes completely eliminate the impact of new development's water use on the community's water supply picture. And so most importantly, can help avoid these politically difficult building moratoriums in resource constrained communities, because I can tell you from personal experience, it's not a fun situation. So we came up with a program that we called NetBlue at the Alliance for Water Efficiency to promote water neutral growth. National Geographic did promote it for us as well. It was a 3-year project to create a national ordinance tool that communities could use and customize to their needs. And we had the Alliance for Water Efficiency, the Environmental Law Institute, and River Network all partnered with us. And we also recruited 7 partner cities to take a look at how this might work. And you can see the blue dots of where these partner cities are. We tried for real geographic diversity. I see that the dot for Acton, Massachusetts has somehow gotten to Canada, but it's supposed to be over in New England. But you'll see we had Texas, New Mexico, California, Montana, Wisconsin, Massachusetts, and Georgia. So we came up with this program that we called NetBlue, and the reason we called it NetBlue was we were afraid that using the term net zero would mean people would have to be off grid or would want to be off grid. And where there are water and sewer services, we definitely wanted people to connect to them. So we wanted to give it a kind of different flavor. So we created a toolkit, this NetBlue toolkit, which we can get free of charge from the Alliance for Water Efficiency. And, we'll give you the link to how you ask for that a little bit later in the presentation. But it developed a number of different tools that would help promote this concept of offsetting water use for new development. There's a model ordinance, so it's a worksheet you can work through and a user guide for that. There are 3 different ordinance examples to show how the ordinance would work. Then we developed an Excel-based offset methodology, which would help you calculate what an offset could be, what the efficiency components might be, what the stormwater components might be, to actually offset water use. And there's a user guide to that. And then 3 offset examples that match the ordinance examples, and then a set of outreach materials. So I'll just go through real quickly what they all are. The model ordinance worksheet is a word-based document, but it allows customization by the user. And it allows for choosing options for a variety of settings. You know, what kind of constraints do you want to place? What are your governing entities that would be regulating this? What are your enabling laws? And we think a lot of different people are going to be using it, not just lawyers, but the developers themselves can use the tools in the NetBlue toolkit to take a look at whether they want to actually develop a piece of property before they buy it, so that they would know what the offset requirement would be. But we also wanted to assist with outreach, so the ordinance deals with that as well. And it's intended to help those who are coming up with the ordinance to think about what the critical issues are for their community. So here's a slide that shows what all the ordinance sections are. It's a typical legally designed document, you know, establishing a legal basis, you know, outlining what the pieces are of the ordinance, outlining who enforces it, adding additional options like an offset credit bank or a new fee, and how the ordinance will be administered. So these are all options that people can choose. The way the ordinance is set up in this Word document is you check the box of what you want to put in your ordinance, and then when you go to print it, it only prints the boxes that you've checked. There's a little button down there that says "Press Me," which is kind of a unique little joke we put in there. But when you hit that button, it actually prints out the ordinance with just what you've chosen in it. The offset methodology workbook, as I mentioned, is an Excel-based workbook, and it's designed to help communities evaluate and select offsets for development projects, but also to help the developers themselves evaluate and select their offsite offsets. So the workbook does a number of things. It allows the developer to enter their new demand information, what they think their new demand is going to be for their development, and then provides them options for water conservation strategies, rainwater harvesting, stormwater capture, or other types of custom offsets like gray water systems, and allows them to apply that to see how it calculates their offset. And so there are lots of different components in the methodology in the workbook. And so you can see here, and I know it's tiny print, but you can see down on the bottom where it's sort of green area, the offset strategies that were listed and can be chosen, you know, by a developer or community to help provide the offset. And then what it produces is an offset table at the end that shows, yes, this particular development has met its 100% offset requirement to offset its water use. And here were the retrofits that would be implemented by the project to get to that water neutrality. And either the utility would implement it for them with the money paid by the developer, or the developer could implement it on their own properties and apply the credit offset. But in any event, this methodology shows how the offset could be calculated. So one of the examples we give in the toolkit is a fictional community called Parker County Council. A county government with surface water shortages, wants to require offsets of all site plan approval requests with a proof of compliance 90 days after the application of approval, but before the CO is issued. Monitoring would be required to validate the savings and to prove that the offset has actually been calculated. And what they were proposing was a 1-to-1, which is 100% offset amount, without an in lieu fee option. So how did they do it? Let's do an example. How about a new beer brewery that wants to locate in Parker County, and their projected new annual water demand would be 1.75 million gallons. Their required offset amount would be, 100% or a 1-to-1. And so the strategy that they were proposing here was an on-site rainwater harvesting project to flush toilets and to also provide single-family toilet replacements. So the offset amount would be 100% of toilet flushing with rainwater on the project, and then the 330,000 excess gallons per year would be used as an offsite credit. But then they'd have to do an additional 129 single-family toilet replacements or pay to have that done by the utility or somebody else, and that would get them to their 100%. So there's a lot of material in this toolkit. In addition to all the stuff that I've just talked about, there's outreach materials that you could use in a community to help get this promoted. There's a fact sheet that can be generally distributed to the citizens in the community. There are frequently asked questions. All of these outreach items are available for online request. And this is what you do. You just email www.net-blue.org, and it'll take you to the Alliance for Water Efficiency page. Very specifically, that will allow you to request the toolkit. We ask that you register for it so that if we make changes to the toolkit, you can then be sent the new materials, updated materials. So it isn't a direct download. We send it to you once you register to get it, but it's totally free. The whole project was funded by a grant, so the whole point of it was to make it available free of charge, for its use. So if anybody has any questions, you feel free to email me. I'm now with Dickinson Associates, but I'm happy to answer a lot of questions about this. I've become kind of a Pied Piper of water neutral development and trying to promote it as much as possible. So that's what I'd like to sort of finish with. And if you have any questions, type them into the Q&A box. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mike from the Green Builder Coalition, who will talk to us about his water efficiency rating system.
All right, thank you, Mary Ann. Appreciate it much, and appreciate the audience today. I kind of put this joking name badge up there because some of you may not have heard of WERS, or the Water Efficiency Rating Score. So I thought I would talk a little bit about it because I do happen to be the chair of the WERS Development Group, in addition to being the executive director of the Green Builder Coalition and one of the co-founders of the Next Generation Water Summit. So if we go to the next slide. The simple fact is, look, if there is no water, then there's no growth, because why would you want to move or live somewhere where there is no water? Mary Ann used the word moratorium earlier. We try and avoid that if we can, but the simple fact is, how do you solve for some of these issues? So Mary Ann talked about the Net Blue Ordinance, which I think is a great idea. I want to talk to you about a water rating called WERS. So with the next slide, I can kind of go in a little bit about what WERS is and what a water rating is. So WERS is a analysis of a property, okay? Not a home, not a building, it's the whole property, lot line in, and it's for new or existing single-family or multifamily residential properties. And what it does is it takes into consideration everything that you've done on the property, product choices, design choices, rainfall amount for that site, a litany of things, and I'll show a list later. But it takes all that into consideration, and then it spits out a number of outputs. And one of those outputs is a score. And the scale is typically 0 to 100, and the easiest way to remember it is lower is better, just like golf. So if we go to the next slide, I'll reiterate to one point from that last slide, which is that this is a third-party process. So this is not something that the homeowner fills out or that the builder fills out. This is done by a third-party professional who comes to the site. If any of you are familiar with water ratings, or I'm sorry, not water, energy ratings, you may have some of these in your communities. This is a very similar approach. We're just looking at water. So the interesting thing about water ratings is that they don't typically mandate anything in and of themselves, okay? They're simply assessing the choices that you've made. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't layer in prescriptive requirements. You certainly can. But boiled down, a water rating such as WERS basically says, what did you choose to do? Okay, we're going to assess that, and assign it a score as to how efficient or not efficient your choices were. And for those of you who maybe have had some challenges in the past trying to struggle with, okay, how do I enact water efficiency or water conservation measures when I'm getting all sorts of pushback, or maybe my city, county council, my mayor is getting pushback from the local HBA. Anybody ever had that issue? If so, something like a water rating can be kind of like an olive branch because, again, it doesn't come down with some hard mandates. It just says, what are you doing? I'm trying to get to a certain efficiency level. However you want to get there is how you get there. So a couple different ways that water ratings can be implemented. A code or regulation. I'll talk a little bit about the city of Santa Fe a little bit later in the presentation. It can be used in a financial incentive, whether that be a tax credit, which we used to have, or potentially a expedited permit review time, maybe a reduction in tap fees, but also it can be utilized in green building programs and is being used in green building programs as an alternative compliance path to, let's say, a prescriptive approach. So on the next slide, what we'll talk about is that list of inputs I talked about earlier. We're looking at basically everything. Now, we may not have an efficiency benchmark for every single thing, but we can at least quantify it on a one-to-one scale. So as you can see, the list on indoor and outdoor, I don't need to read it for you, but it's all there. And we built this tool. We actually started about 9.5 years ago to really look at everything, every single thing. So even one of the things that's listed there, black water systems. You're not going to see a lot of black water systems in residential properties, but we built it into the tool from the beginning because we were able to. So on the next slide, talk about those outputs. I talked about the score earlier. From 0 to 100, lower is better, just like golf. But there are other outputs as well. There are projected usage on a couple different time horizons. Also, you can enter in your water costs. We have a fairly robust entry in our tool for a variety of water pricing schemes. That could be tiered, it could be just straight, it could be CCF or 1,000 gallons, it could be, you know, you meter outdoor different than indoor. There's a variety of options that are out there in the water landscape, so to speak. So we built that into our tool as well. And because of that, now you can see the outputs on those same 3 time horizons as far as the effect on the costs. Also, for those who are focused on GPCD, or gallons per capita per day, we have that output as well. And then the other thing is for existing homes. What I like about the tool is you can basically use it to play the what if game. You can say, okay, this is what I have right now, but I want to make these changes. How is that going to affect the water usage? How is it going to affect my water costs? And you can play with that all day long if you want to. So on the next slide, give you a little glimpse of our rating report. What you're seeing is part of a screen, okay, because it's a screenshot. So you're seeing the breakdown of, that's an actual home, of combined usage, estimated costs, and then what you can't see above it would be the breakdown of indoor and outdoor. So you're just seeing the combined. You're also seeing the words on both if you utilize reuse and what if this project didn't utilize reuse. And you say, well, why is that? Why do you have it broken out 2 different ways? It's because one of those green building programs that we are in is actually a water-focused program. It's water-scarce for homes 2.0. And when we got approved as an HCO in WaterSense, we did not get approved for utilizing reuse. It doesn't mean you can't use reuse. It just means if you're going for WaterSense for homes, you have to assess the property and just you can't count the offsets of reuse systems. So we have that score there, but then we also show what your score would be if you could bring that in. So if we go on to the next slide, I think part of what I just showed you there in that table and what I talked about with those 2 lists is that with something like a water rating, especially WERS, you're going to get data, and more data, okay? And for those of you who are data geeks and want to check out, you know, a lot of different facets of a property, this is something that you should really consider. The only data you're not going to get is that guy who keeps crashing my presentations, probably because I said his name 3 times. So next slide. So how can you use WRS and why? Obviously, we're trying to preserve and extend the use of an essential resource, okay? The nice thing, though, from a land use planner standpoint, water plan, is simply this. Your jurisdiction can control how efficient new construction can be. You could also, if you wanted to, enact something for existing. I haven't quite seen that yet, but it's on the table, I guess. But it allows you to say, okay, look, this is where it's got to be. And however you want to get there is however you're going to get there, but it's got to be at this level or even more efficient than that. And you can allow responsible growth in places where maybe you go, should we be growing? And maybe you're catching heat from some of the general public as to, should we? Now, I mentioned codes. Santa Fe's got it in their code. City of Santa Barbara also references water ratings in their code. You see also a list of the green building programs that we're in, both in the US and in Canada. And also, real quick explanation. So the National Green Building Standard, they have a WRI. The WRI is based on WRS. So that's why I have that listed in there. So if you're familiar with the ANSI document, National Green Building Standard, that's where that came from. The next slide, we'll talk a little bit specifically about Santa Fe and how they're using WRS. So 6.5 years ago, they put it into their residential green building code. So this was a requirement for all new single-family homes. They had to get a WRS of 70 or less when they went to go get their permit. They had to get it based off the design. Then they had to go get a certificate of occupancy, and they had to show and confirm that they still had a score of 70 or less. The 2 scores can vary because things can happen in a design process, in the construction process. But both times, both for the permit and for the certificate of occupancy, you had to get a 70 or less. Now, we're supporting their conservation goals for the future because they want to take that score down to 65 for single family, and they also want to bring in a multifamily requirement and set that score at 65 as well. So we're working with them to be able to make that happen. Now, the next slide here. One thing I finally want to kind of finish up on is that I'm not doing a walkthrough of the tool right now. We're just talking in kind of a high level of this. But what's interesting about the tool is that it contains a number of tools within itself. So it'll size tanks and cisterns, or you can tell it what size tank you're putting in, and then it gives you direction on your offsets. You can do irrigation design with it. You can also do fixture modeling, especially in multifamily. You know, hey, if I swap out these shower heads, or if I get this shower head on a rebate, how's this going to make a difference? And you can also conduct some water audits because, again, you're looking at a variety of inputs, both indoor and outdoor. So I wanted to make sure to mention that for those who are maybe going, well, maybe not for this, but maybe for this other purpose, we can utilize this. So there with my final slide then, that's a way that you can get a hold of me. And I want to make sure to leave time in Q&A for people to ask questions. And also wanted to make sure that I introduce the person who's next, who's following me, which is Christine Chavez from the City of Santa Fe and this year's Water Star Award winner from the Alliance for Water Efficiency. So, Christine, go right ahead.
Well, thank you, Mike. And hello, everyone. My name is Christine Chavez, and I manage the City of Santa Fe's Water Conservation Program in New Mexico. And I'm glad I'm following the WRS discussion because that's been a really important part of our growth process in Santa Fe. You know, with the WRS score, all new development is required to be built, you know, at least at a 30% more, 30% more efficient than the baseline home. So we've built in conservation there. But as Marianne was talking about earlier, you know, we are constantly being criticized by the public. I mean, I think just everywhere, conservation is directly related to growth in Santa Fe because the water that is conserved is used as an offset for affordable housing for larger developments. And so we're kind of a different, it's a different approach here, and I'll talk about the pros and cons of it. But we can go ahead and move to the next slide. So in Santa Fe, in 2010, the Water Conservation Program was established along with the water bank. The purpose of the water bank was to ensure that there was adequate water for increased water use tied to new construction. Our ordinance states that you have to get a water budget approved through our utility division. And so we have to work really closely with our land use section. And so this is a great partnership, I think, an example of how we work really, really closely with them to review new developments that are coming in, to make sure that they're meeting the WERS requirements. And then in our system in New Mexico, we have a pretty complex water law that's tied to water rights. And pre-1907 water rights are the only water rights that you can bring into our system because they have been adjudicated through the Office of the State Engineer, and most of them are held by farmers. And so part of our approach is we can go out and try to obtain these water rights by buying them from farms, having them dry out, and then go through an application process to the state engineer's office to transfer that water over to a municipal use, which isn't a very popular option. But the other option that we have established in our code is to use water conservation credits, which are established through our rebate program. And depending on what size of development or project is coming in, you're either going to be bringing in water rights or you can be paying a fee to access some of the conserved water through the program. Let's see, water bank in action. So we have an above threshold and under threshold, a table that determines whether or not you need to bring in those water rights or whether or not you can access the water conservation credits or actually transfer water rights, like I said previously, from a farm over to municipal. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So the city's water conservation program has been really successful. We have decreased overall consumption by 25%, while our population has increased by 33%. We have a really great conservation story. Sometimes it gets a little mangled when it gets tied into the growth conversation. But again, the pros to the program are that we're not going out and trying to dry out, farms and transfer that water back into our system. We're just using the conserved water as an offset for new development. So the city uses a dual track approach. The first is through water conservation. We have several different programs. We have a pretty aggressive pricing structure. We have rebates on household fixtures, and then we have a lot of community advertising and education. And the second is a transfer of water rights, as I've been talking about. New residential and commercial development must offset the anticipated water to be used through conservation or transfer enough water rights to serve the entire development at build out. Okay, go to the next slide. So what happens in our process is the developer brings the proposed project to the land use department, and then water division staff determines whether or not that project falls above threshold or below threshold, which determines the amount of water that's going to be used. Let me just move that out of the way. So the water usage is based upon new construction, and I'll show you a table in the next slide that has the threshold amounts for single family residential and commercial projects. So we determine the water usage based upon the landscape irrigation budget. We subtract the water use for affordable housing waivers, and then we calculate the total development water budget with the 9.8% contingency. And that's a little confusing, but I think in the next slide, okay, there we go. So this is a table that we use here. We have developed this water budget table through a series of audits that were conducted throughout the city for various uses. This does have to be updated. It was developed in 2010, and we know now that businesses and homes are built much more efficiently. And so we've sort of over allocated the amount of water that we feel should be used. So we're in the process right now of trying to update this with in coordination with our WaterWise program, where we're actually auditing all these different uses and trying to calculate that budget amount. But it just transfers over. So this is per dwelling unit for just single family residential. We estimate that 0.15 acre feet are used per year, and that's translated out per dwelling unit. And then the fee that you can pay is established through this water budget table. And the fee is $15,500 per acre foot. And that allows you to access either the water rights that we've already established in our profile, or you can bring those water rights in and not pay the fee, or you can pay the fee if it's a below threshold project and access water conservation credits. Okay, next slide. So above threshold, this is the table here. So if we have a commercial development that comes in above 5 acre feet, then we would require you to bring in water rights or to pay that $15,500 fee to access the water rights that we already have in our profile. And then if you go to the next slide, and those are mostly large developments. Those are housing developments, bigger projects. Some of these below threshold projects include remodels. Some of our city projects also are considered a part of this pool. But if you fall below, these threshold amounts, then you're able to pay the city to dedicate the conserved water and use that, as an offset for your develop or for your project that falls below threshold. Next slide, please. So Santa Fe is growing quite a bit. There's a lot of conversation right now around, how quickly the city is growing. Affordable housing is a really, really big issue for us. A lot of multifamily units have been built in the last 2-3 years. There's lots of concern and gripe from our residents about where the water is coming from and whether there's enough water for growth. I mean, all the same questions that I know that we're all hearing. This water bank structure is different in the sense that, like I said, in New Mexico, about 70% of all the water is used for agriculture. And so there's a lot of issues with going out and trying to acquire those water rights to support the system. So it's hard to stand from a conservation, perspective and talk about, all the water that you're conserving is kind of being reallocated to support growth. But the other options to do that, I think, are a lot harder to swallow. So it is what it is. Conservation is a part of it. And then, of course, we are still having to actively pursue water rights on the Rio Grande just to continue to build up our portfolio. And the state engineer's office has a whole offset program, as you pump water out of the ground from your wells, but you have to actually return some of that water into the Rio Grande as part of the permit. And so it's really complicated once you get into the water right part of the program, but this is just a snapshot of the water rights that we have in our portfolio now, which actually do support most of the growth that's happening, but the under threshold, the remodels and the smaller projects and the affordable housing components, are definitely covered by the water that's been conserved through the water conservation rebate program. Okay, and that's it from my slides. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll go ahead and pass it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Christine. So my name's Kevin McCusker. I'm the Community Affairs Manager for California Water Service. If we could move the slide over. So I'm going to give you a very, very brief amount of background on Cal Water. We're going to talk a little bit, again, very briefly, because we've already covered much of this about the overview of water offsets, and then spend most of the time talking about our pilot for development offset program. As you look at the map, Cal Water serves a variety of communities up and down California, from Chico in the north down to Palos Verdes in the south. But in particular, you want to look at the San Francisco Bay Area, where it's listed as Bay Shore and Bear Gulch. That is the area, excuse me, that I'll be talking about with regard to the development offset program. If we could go to the next slide. So Cal Water, California Water Service, is part of the California Water Service group. That includes also Hawaii Water, New Mexico Water, Texas Water, which is relatively new, and Washington Water. We are the largest subsidiary of the group. Overall, we're the third largest investor-owned water utility in the nation, and we are the largest operating west of the Mississippi. Here in California, we've got about 2 million people that we're serving. If we can go to the next slide. So I think we all understand the problem. I think we've covered much of this ground already. We have many cities that are already challenged to meet their existing customer demands, and more pressure on the demands for a growing population, as well as the need for economic growth. I think it's important to note that that residential development, new housing for people to migrate up in the housing plateau, is what opens up inventory for affordable housing down the ladder, and that economic growth itself is the flywheel that drives our communities. And so as drought and water shortages occur, it's not always logical to the customers to understand why we can bring in new development, or the benefit of new development when they're being asked to cut back on their water. So there's a bit of a conundrum there that is counterintuitive for people. And there are communities that cannot accommodate the growth with their current water supplies. If we can move to the next slide. So the principle of water offsets, actually, Marianne had this exact slide earlier in the presentation, but it's important to note that it's important for these offsets because it can allow for these types of growth with mitigating, or even without increasing at all system-wide increase in demand. And we try to look at a combination, just as Marianne said, of on-site and water and off-site water efficiency, and try to eliminate the impact of the new development on our water supply, and obviously to avoid the moratoriums that no communities really want, or at least very few of them. If we can go to the next slide. So the Alliance for Water Efficiency, again, and Marianne's former CEO there, we kind of looked at their water offset policies, and this for us was really a starting point for what we're trying to enact up in our Bay Area service districts. It's a review of literature and terminology and policies that currently exist or that were passed. But the goal there was to provide this basis for some kind of development of a national model, and so we kind of looked at that. As what is the model, or the preferred model, and the methodology for getting to these planning and zoning practices that are going to help us get to where we need to be here in California. If we can go to the next slide. So I think there's multiple tools in the toolbox here, and we've touched on most of these. For new development, you want to have we have some offset requirements, as well as potential offset requirements for existing development, but for expanded use within those existing connections. New development fees, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, and most of our next set of slides is going to focus on some of that. Christine just talked about water bank with regard to California, and in particular the area where I'm going to focus on, where we're piloting this development neutral, water neutral development policy. Water banking and bringing new water to the table is not very easily done in that area. There's severe constraints. And these offsets are also required for development that requires any kind of annexation. And, from the municipal or public side, that can be your general plan growth rings. For us, it's annexing new areas as the Public Utilities Commission approves boundary growths for us. If we can go to the next slide. So specific to the area I'm talking about, which for us is our Bear Gulch and our Bayshore service areas. There's a lot of people here. Many of you, or most of you, are probably not from California, but there's what's called the Bay Delta Plan, the San Francisco Bay San Joaquin Delta Plan. That was amended in 2018 to allow for more constriction based on multiple dry year modeling, and it brought down some of the estimations in a way that really was impacting our service areas in that area. So the adoption of those amendments from 2018 has really affected us, because with regard to Bear Gulch and Bayshore, if you take our mid-peninsula, which is kind of San Mateo, as well as South San Francisco together, that's a surface water area. And so 90% of our supply is coming from the SFPUC. And so that water is subject to those amendments under the Bay Delta Plan. And so it really has constrained our ability to serve growth in that area. And so that's why that is the target area for us to start rolling out this process right now. If we can go to the next slide. So we've developed this kind of set of development offset program requirements. And as I said, this is brand new for us. That we're really just piloting this and seeing how it goes. As I just said, we've got regulatory changes. We've got the climate change and a lot of other factors that kind of drove us in this direction as a company that are impacting and affecting our water supply reliability, particularly when you start modeling it out over multiple scenarios, over multiple dry year scenarios. So we started independently, but we can't exist that way. So we've also started. We also brought in local and regional stakeholders to try and look at what are the alternative water supply projects that can be implemented. And you got some examples there. These are of particular interest up in that area. Groundwater development's not always available where we're talking about brackish water desal in that area. Recycled water, including direct potable reuse, water transfers, which is a little more tricky in that area, as well as expanding our existing conservation programs. And we have a very robust portfolio of those. If you can go to the next slide. So I think there's a lot to unpack on this slide in particular, but if you look at the map, this is the area that we're talking about, or that I'm talking about in particular, where we're rolling this out. You can see South San Francisco, which is just below the actual city of San Francisco. It's its own civic and municipal entity. It's a highly industrial area. Then our Bayshore area there, identified as a mid-peninsula, and then a little bit further down, our Bear Gulch service area. This is the area where it is heavily reliant on this SFPUC water supply, which is highly constrained by the 2018 amendments to the Bay Delta Plan. So there's a need for new water supplies, and because in multiple dry year scenarios, we're looking at water shortfalls. So I'm sure everybody on the call here, on the session here today, is in agreement that the best new supply is making existing supply go further, right? It's the most cost-effective source of new supply is better efficiency with existing supply. And so we've tried to focus on that, and we've come up with about a 15,400 per acre foot of annual net demand increase as the facilities fee. But I know that's always the most interesting thing. But the third bullet here is the starting point in many ways. You can't get to the fee unless you develop the portfolio of expanded conservation and alternative water supply projects. You have to know what's in that portfolio, what is the possible increased revenue need in order to develop those tools to address this. And then from there, you can backtrack and develop the fee that's going to provide the revenue in order to drive that particular component that is so necessary in this area up on the indicated on the map. If we can go to the next slide. So again, you got to set some benchmarks. You got to start somewhere. But I think it's important to note that, and I've said it many times, this is a brand new process for us. So we were not in a position where we could sit and wait for a perfect solution. There's no magic bullet to this. So what we're trying to do is come up with a methodology where we can come up with something that's going to suffice. And then kind of develop and improve it incrementally and iteratively as we move forward. So right now, the benchmark for the fee is a net demand of 50 acre feet per year or more. So once you cross that 50 acre feet threshold, it triggers the offset fees. The funds collected from this are used to develop these water supply projects, to expand our existing conservation programs in order to offset that net demand increase. And so you got to get to that balancing point of what is the cost on the execution side to offset the increase in demand, and then you need to develop the fee to fill that cost need. And the developments have to be reevaluated at the time of connection. So the plan comes in, plans change between when they're filed versus when they're executed. And so you really have to go in and reevaluate the development as it's actually coming up on time of connection, as opposed to relying on the plan as at the time it was filed. If we can go to the next slide. So this is part of an overall comprehensive strategy that we've had to implement up and down the state. This is one small component, and unclear yet how it's going to tweak going forward versus other parts of the state where we might need to roll it out. Right now, it's focused in that South Bay area that we serve. And we're trying to, not only meet the existing demand, which already is quite constrained, but to allow for increase in demand with these offsets so that we can do what we're supposed to do, which is provide safe, clean, and affordable water now and in the future. If we can go to the next slide. So I think it's interesting to talk about where we are already and what we've learned already. The first bullet I think I've already hit there quite a bit, and we've been talking about it, and other panelists have talked about it as well. I think what's really interesting for us, and maybe it's because California and water constraints are so top of mind here, particularly in that Bay Area. The development community has pretty much accepted this. When we rolled it out, we were expecting more pushback than we've gotten. That's not to say that anybody likes paying additional fees, but they understand the need because they understand the severe water supply constraints in that region. And so we've found people willing to go along with this. We've seen them adjusting their plans to try and get under the threshold, as one might imagine. But that also shows that it's already changing behaviors in the way that they're designing their developments. In many ways, we've seen them submit plans and then pull and then go through the change process in the planning process in order to try and get below that 50 acre feet threshold. We're already looking at whether or not we need to lower the threshold. The other thing I think it's important to mention in the case of lessons learned is you have to look at all of the development proposals in your service area. They have to be taken holistically as well as individually, because what you're trying to do with the 50 acre feet threshold might not get done if you have multiple projects in the pipeline that are at 45 acre feet that might still drive demand over what you can actually sustain. And so you have to look at it holistically as well as individually. So it makes up a mosaic of how you have to account for it. And that's why we're already investigating whether or not we need to lower that threshold for any development that requires a water supply assessment, which is a regulatory requirement here in California. Another thing I think that's interesting to note for anybody who might be considering this type of thing is right now, as it exists, it's actually you pay the fee at the time of at the time of construction. There's no down payment, there's no deposit. That potentially is creating a bit of a cash flow issue on paying for the planning for these projects. And so again, already changes being implemented or being considered about whether or not there needs to be some kind of a deposit prior to the start of construction in order to continue to fund our side of the planning need for expanded conservation or offset water supply projects. And the other thing that needs to be considered and that we're already in the process of reevaluating is making sure that you're revising the acceptance of facilities process to validate square footage. Initially, we were just looking at connection size, but now we have to look at connection size as well as total square footage as we go through that acceptance of facilities process. Go to the next slide. I think that is it. Yeah, thank you.
So at this point, Christine, I think we can turn it over to you for the questions. And just want to leave the slide up here for a minute so people can see the emails, but we can also make that available later. I think we can't hear you, Christine.
I don't know sign language well enough.
So while we're getting Christine's audio set, if you have any questions, please put them in the question and answer box, and we'll go through them and them for everybody.
Marianne, just before we get going, Christine, are you able to connect? No.
That's so weird.
I was curious if there were any general estimates of how much water use it can be attributed to sort of inefficient water use. And that probably changes by geography and outdoor-indoor ratios and all sorts of things. But it strikes me that there's a diminishing amount of water that we can reclaim from inefficient use.
Well, there's a fair amount in terms of outdoor irrigation, particularly in the West. And, 40 to 50% of that is probably inefficiently applied and therefore wasted. So that's a huge area, but it's an expensive area to do that demand reduction. And so that's one area where offsets can help because it can help fund some of that more expensive activity. But we are gradually reducing indoor water use pretty well across the country. It's the outdoor water use that remains an issue.
And I was curious if you're told there is a program now of turf grass removal.
Otherwise, just press pound to continue.
Oh, well, we hear
Can you hear me
Christine now.
You can hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes,
now.
You have
I
I
didn't-
heard your phone.
I didn't do anything though.
There you are. Okay,
I'm back.
you're all
You
good.
can hear
We're
me.
back. Great.
We can hear you. Yes.
I didn't
Marianne,
do
did your
anything
program
different.
include turf grass removal?
Yes.
at all?
Turf grass removal is a very big incentive program in California and other
right.
Western states. Yes.
Colorado, Nevada.
Incentivizing people to voluntarily reduce the amount of turf that they're using and banning non-functional turf that's only walked on when
Exactly.
it's being
Right.
mowed. Yeah. Those are
All
big
right, we'll turn
programs.
it back to Christine since
Yeah.
she is.
I'm scared I'm going to
regained her
get
voice.
lost again, but I guess I'm back. Okay. So what I was saying is that I wanted to just really get in and move in quickly and talk about acronyms. The question is the acronym WERS, WERS, and the WERS system similar or inspired by the home energy rating system, or HERS, HERS rating system developed by ResNet? And then it goes on, there's another part, but first, can someone answer that logistical question?
Yeah, so WERS is Water Efficiency Rating Score. HERS is Home Energy Rating System. So they have one word in common out of the four, but HERS, it comes from the organization ResNet, and they do have a water rating as well that they call HERS H2O. So they have the connectivity there based on the HERS acronym. But WERS is a different approach. They're similar, right? They're both water ratings. They both focus on single family. Ours focuses on multifamily though as well, and also has a reuse component, and theirs does not. So those are two of the large differences between the two.
Perfect. WERS appears that it could work for rural well-supplied residential developments. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I look at it this way. When it comes to municipalities, okay, you can implement something like a water rating however you would like. So I mentioned the score of 70 with Santa Fe. They picked that number, I didn't. I don't tell places what number they have to choose. They choose whatever number. You want to layer in prescriptive requirements as well, fine, you can. You know, the implementation of it is purely up to the authority having jurisdiction, not me. So that's how flexible something like this can be. And then when it comes to things like well areas, we do actually have a drop down for wells in our tool. So that is something that we can look at. And I know that Richard actually reached out to me by email as well. So I need to get back to him by email and maybe follow up with a phone call as well. But for those who are in rural areas, yeah, I mean, there's flexibility in its implementation.
Okay, thank you. I like this question. So how do you connect the supply side of planning and subdivision water allowance and the site efficiency requirement? So the question says Santa Fe uses both demand offset at subdivision and WERS at building code for efficiency. Does Santa Fe track the individual developments after approved to estimate their commitments? So they're trying to understand the relationship between the supply side and the green building side. Christine.
Okay, well, the truth is we don't link supply side water development planning with individual project site efficiency requirements, like WERS within the building code. We do go back. So when somebody submits a water budget, we do go back and perform we can go back and perform an audit on the project to see whether or not they stayed, within their water budget. We have some things built into our code where they're given a certain amount of time to bring it back within that budget. Otherwise, they do have to bring in, either additional water rights or they have to pay additional fees to acquire more water for their project. But yeah, I mean, we kind of do that on a case-by-case scenario. When we did do that, that's when we realized that our water budget table may have been over allocating, what we thought they would use, especially since 2010. I think things have become so much more efficient. But yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah. Oh, this one's interesting. Okay. How does water neutral development relate to other environmental issues outside of limited water supply in drought prone areas, such as like gravel pit mining operations, where they mine gravel below the water table? They might violate agreements on mining, draining issues, or Are there any groundwater prohibition zones related to being in a contaminated plume of contamination from an industrial use, which might limit water well drilling? Do these water neutral developments help in these situations where there might be other environmental factors at play?
So that's a really interesting question.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
water neutral development as a concept, the offset concept, was really born in the sort of water scarcity kind of considerations, but it does have environmental benefits because as you reduce the actual extraction and withdrawal of water and limit it, it is providing environmental pollution prevention benefits, especially in some of those difficult uses that you mentioned in the question. And if the area being considered here for water neutral development is largely dependent on groundwater, how you change those groundwater extractions can have some pretty significant environmental benefits. And we have not explored that quite yet. We've explored the connection between rainwater and stormwater management and tying those benefits into water neutral development to enable the water that's basically saved through those measures into a form of offset. But the water quality impacts are a very interesting point that I think we need to take a closer look at.
Also, Marianne, I would think that in terms of reducing surface water extraction, it would improve base flow conditions, it would improve ecological conditions along waterways.
Yeah.
And in terms of groundwater extraction, as you noted, the changes in how that extraction occurs could alter how contaminants are spreading from other sources of pollution. So it's a secondary group of benefits, but very interesting.
Yeah.
Next question. This is a good one, and it's going to segue into a question that I have. What do you all see as the biggest barriers to communities adopting net blue development ordinances?
Well, one barrier, especially if it's being applied to single family housing construction or expansion of single family use, that can be perceived as a barrier to the individual homeowners in the community. Usually people say, well, developers are all going to come in and oppose it. But as Kevin mentioned, one of the things that this process does, this water neutral development offset process does, is it provides some predictability and some, actual ways for a developer to evaluate what the impact is going to be to their development before they actually make an investment in the property. So we don't find the pushback from developers that we thought we would. That's not a barrier that everybody expected. But in areas where there's rapid development, where there's a huge economic push, trying to dial back on that in this way might be a political barrier until you work it through community stakeholder processes. And that's one of the reasons why we came up with a lot of outreach materials, because we figured stakeholders who were very concerned about the land use growth in their community would want to have a say in how this works. And that was one of the things we learned from the 7 partner cities that we worked with when we developed the Net Blue materials. They all said that they felt it very important that the community stakeholders who typically come to planning and zoning meetings very concerned about comprehensive plans, that they be part of this adoption process. And so I think that would be one barrier that would be removed with that process. I think another barrier, maybe Christine would and Kevin could speak to this, is when you're assessing the fees and then parking the fees in your bank and then trying to apply those fees back out to make sure that they match the offset you need. That's an administrative burden that is a little bit of a barrier. Water utilities are saying, I don't want to have to deal with that. And land use communities are saying, well, we're short staffed. We don't know how we're going to deal with that. We need somebody else to help us. So that kind of work is probably a barrier too.
Yeah, I think that's well stated. There's an administrative cost of going through the process that it increases your operational cost. And here in California, the constraint is doesn't matter whether you're a public or municipal water provider or an investor-owned water provider. For the municipals here, we have something called Prop 18 or Prop 218, which means anything that you are charging, you have to have it has to match the cost. And the same for us in the regulatory process for the Public Utilities Commission to approve anything that we're suggesting, we have to show that it meets the cost. So there has to be a dollar for dollar almost, and that's pretty tricky.
I think
Talk
I would
about-
add,
Oh, go ahead.
No.
Go ahead, Christine. Keep going. Keep going.
Well, just from a conservation perspective, I guess the issue in Santa Fe is that growth sort of outpaces conservation's ability to put credits in the bank. And the issue with that is that a lot of conservation efforts aren't quantifiable, you know. So if it's a direct toilet replacement, that's something that's pretty easy to quantify. But as Marianne was talking about the outdoor sector and the opportunities there, we're in a mad dash to try to quantify all of our efforts across the board so that we can take credit for all the conservation that's happening in the form of a conservation credit. So quantification of conservation is a big challenge, I would say.
I'll just add in political will.
Mhm.
You know, if you've got places that want to do something, but they're getting pushback from the building and development community or the real estate community, you know, the question you got to ask yourself is, okay, if we don't do this and we start to run short on water, now what does that look like? So to me, do you have the political will to make it happen?
I'd like to tie in some equity into this, equity and environmental justice, and just thinking about perhaps the more disproportionate low-income communities that are already suffering from lack of water and the need, for example, for affordable housing. And we're looking at, this is not a cheap, potentially, endeavor. From the community's standpoint, from a developer standpoint, how do we ensure that NetBlue is equitable?
Well, actually, one of the reasons to develop this water offset program was because of an equity and environmental justice issue, because the new supply options would have been very difficult to implement without great cost. And that cost gets reflected in rates, which then are, you know, disproportionately affecting low-income communities. So what we were hoping is that by making the development a little bit more water neutral, it would reduce the costs on the water system, which then have the net benefit of keeping rates lower for the disadvantaged, you know, customers. So that was one issue that we wanted very specifically to have it address. But where you've got you know, I'm thinking of, you know, in California, the city of Porterville in the Central Valley, which ran out of water altogether. I mean, water neutral development is not going to help Porterville because they lost their well altogether. So it is going to be a situation by situation concern. And in California, all the planners that I have been talking to say, you know, we're getting direction from the governor to increase affordable housing, but we also are getting direction to reduce water consumption and reduce the amount of supply surface water withdrawals that we do and groundwater withdrawals that we do. You can't, it's a
Can't do
mismatch.
both. Yeah.
Right. So water neutral development, we hope, can help a little with that. It's not, of course, a 100% solution, but it is a tool in that toolbox. Oh, Bill, you're muted.
Unmute yourself.
You're muted.
Good, I'm not the only one today.
Marianne, does it help with the transparency of that process? You're accounting for you know, the less efficient water uses. Oftentimes the supply development process is not that transparent. So
well, yes, and consumption, individual consumption is not at all transparent. Utilities do not share customer information, and that becomes difficult for, but what conservation programs do is, as Christine well knows, is you target within the utility, you target your high water users and attempt to have them, you know, reduce their water use, but it's not public information who that is. And that's not true in energy. Profligate use in energy is a matter of public
right.
and it's transparent, but we haven't quite gotten there yet in water.
So to what extent can we audit later on to determine how closely water usage is mirroring the estimates based on the tools.
Well, we can
I'll
go
give it-
back and do kind of a post-assessment, if you want to call it that. I'll have Christine follow up on this too, but to me, and this is something that I say a lot when I present on WERS, is the assessment that you make is a snapshot in time. It's like a picture. It's true at that moment. You go and make changes later on, you have change of ownership in the house or the property, then now all of a sudden things can change. So you're looking at a snapshot in time. Now, we have done some basic studies with the City of Santa Fe's cooperation. And what we've found is that while the model is not perfect, and really no model is going to be perfect, we've seen a range in accuracy from about 10% off to about 40% off. Now, that is overestimating the water usage. So I would rather have it overestimate the water usage rather than underestimate, because then if the property were actually using more than what you thought, you'd be in trouble. If you estimate that it's using more than it actually is, now you're not in as big of a trouble. So we've found that on a basic study, but Christine, you want to follow up on that at all?
I was just gonna bring up, so cannabis was legalized in New Mexico about a year ago. And, we had to estimate, how much water we thought that industry would be using. And so we're actually auditing, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. We're trying to figure out if we got close, and so I'm just saying, as a new sector, we make estimates, but we're learning ourselves, whether or not we came in within that budget.
If I could just piggyback off that for 1 second and to refer back to something I said, which is in many cases, it has to be by nature an iterative process. And as Mike said, no model or estimate is going to be exact every time. You have to bake into the plan the idea that you're trying to find something that suffices in the moment, that can be built upon and improved upon over time. Otherwise, you're sitting around trying to come up with the perfect solution as opposed to what suffices and can be built upon.
Kevin, when you mentioned baking in the plan, that's a good segue into this question that comes all the way from Australia. So the question is, do any of the mechanisms account for the fact that not all water savings are equal in terms of water security? So in a severe drought, indoor water efficiency and on-site reuse will continue to save water when rain tanks and efficient irrigation may not. So again, do any of the mechanisms account for water savings, not being equal?
Well, in the NetBlue program, they're not prioritized per se, but it's very clear that if an on-site gray water system is installed, that continues to provide long-term benefit in the project and doesn't diminish with, ambient rainfall or stormwater capture. So from a developer standpoint, picking those kinds of solutions that have more permanency to them would be a long-term benefit, especially if it's being monitored by the water utility or community as to whether the offset's being maintained. So the question's absolutely right. Yeah, but we didn't in the toolkit we put together, we didn't actually prioritize those based on what you're suggesting. That's something that could happen.
Right.
And also, at least with regard to what we're trying to do, as a result of the amendments to the Bay Delta Accord, that requires our water supply assessment. We're running models in multiple dry year scenarios. So you're trying to find out what the demand is going to be and what the effect on your sustainable supply is going to be in multiple scenarios. And that includes multiple dry year scenarios.
Our model is based on data we get from the International Water Management Institute. However, we also built into the tool a municipal override. So let's say a municipality like the gentleman from Australia is asking about says, hey, you know what? We know that we've got this situation here. we can build that in. And then furthermore, like as I mentioned before, when you implement something like a water rating, you can say, look, we're going to require this kind of toilet or this kind of shower head or these kind of indoor efficiency measures that we know are going to have a return on investment, so to speak. And while we can allow rainwater harvesting, we're not going to necessarily reward or incentivize it as much as something else. Again, the flexibility of implementation.
I'm going to round out with one last question. And that is for the folks on the line, our planners that might be in the public sector, even in the private sector that are consulting with our communities, and they go, wow, I want to do this. Where do they start? Who needs to be at the table for that first discussion to kind of get a plan together, get the resources together, get the facts together, to take them to our decision makers and convince them that this is important and you see things coming down the line that, are going to, we need to do this now before we have trouble down the line. So who needs to be at the table first?
Well, I think you need the water utility and the land use planners at the table to talk. And they need to have a process where they involve important stakeholders. So the city of Bozeman, Montana, has been discussing this issue, and they put together, workshops for their community to look at those issues in a very public, transparent process. I think that's important, especially if you have developers that have concerns. So there needs to be, the water utility needs to be involved, and so do the land use planners. And that's, in my opinion, the place to start.
And ultimately, the public officials will need to take action.
Yeah.
I think it was important to mention, Mary Ann, you identified a whole series of tools and Mike and models. And most of those are free, I believe, and available for people to test out and understand the implications in their town.
Real quick, Chris.
Oh, go ahead. Nope, go ahead.
So the whole concept of WERS was created out of a meeting by the City of Santa Fe's Water Conservation Committee and the Home Builders Association there in Santa Fe. So to your question, how did that start? Well, they recognized that, hey, if we run out of water, we run out of jobs. If we run out of jobs, no one wants to live here, property values plummet, property tax revenue plummets. It's just a spiral that's not good.
Yeah.
They were proactive in having that meeting, and so that was the case study out of Santa Fe.
Great. It's time to wrap up. Thank you all for joining us today. This was a really good conversation. I loved it. We had such wonderful questions. So thank you. As a reminder to everyone, we are recording the session. We'll have it up on our YouTube channel. Be sure to log those credits. You can get the title and the event number that you need from our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And that's where you can register for all of our upcoming sessions that we have. So again, the Henry Division and the Water and Planning Network, thank you for hosting today. We love to have you aboard, and thanks to all of our panelists for coming on today. Everyone, have a great weekend, and we'll talk next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
Take
everybody.
care.